A few people come into our office recently with massive superannuation bills. They've basically been in a situation where they paid super for some of their staff a little bit late, gone through some kind of audit with the tax office and come up with this absolutely epic large bill. A lot of the time these people have pretty much paid off the super. If you worked out how much they owed, they pretty much paid all of it off. But the bill is, equal to as if they've never paid super at all, or maybe even like double what they would have paid if they'd paid on time. Now, the reason this is happening is because the tax office recently changed their policy regarding penalties for superannuation. The other reason this is happening is because the rules regarding superannuation and late payments are very vague and technical, and have all sorts of twists and turns to them which you wouldn't expect. So let me go through an example. I'll tell you how the system works, and then we can analyze how we solve the problem, and if you are in this unfortunate situation, what you can do about it. Okay, so let's start off with the system. If you pay superannuation late, let's say you owe someone $200 and you are a couple of months late and then you pay them. You are still late when it comes to working out the penalty until you hand in what's called an SG form. Okay? So that might only happen when you get audited. You might not know about this form. Let's say you get audited 2 or 3 years later for this $200 bit of super. The auditor says you didn't fill in the SG form, you fill one in, bang, 3 years later, this is what happens. That $200, which you've already paid, you're charged interest on that for 3 years, because the interest runs from the date that it was due to the date that you actually hand in the SG charge form. Got nothing to do with whether you paid your super or not. So you're paying 3 years worth of interest straight off the bat. The second thing that's happening is the penalties are calculated based on your super guarantee charge. What's that? The super guarantee charge is the super that you paid late, that $200. So they'll take that $200 and they start off with a penalty of 200%, which is $400. That's on top of paying the $200. So you're paying $600 all up. Okay, so you start off with a penalty of $400 and you've been paying interest for 3 years on $200 of super that you only paid a couple of months late, and that's already been paid. Okay, so that's the starting point, and that's why people start off with big bills. Now, what was the change recently? The tax office used to be a bit more generous when it came to forgiving this 200% penalty. And in the end, it might work out to a penalty of 10% or 20% or 5%. Sometimes they'd waive it altogether. But recently, the tax office changed their practice statement. Now, a practice statement is something that every staff member in the tax office has to follow. And that practice statement said, you can only reduce the penalties by a little bit and in very specific situations. It's a lot harder to get a reduction. Someone who used to get a penalty of 5 or 10% might get a penalty of 100% now. It's really, really different. It's really, really strict now. Now, the person who's working at the tax office doesn't have much say about the situation. They have to follow the practice statement. The practice statement says this is what you need to pay, and they put it through a computer. The computer spits out a penalty, and they just have to honour that, right? And they have to charge you that. A lot of the time they don't want to. They know it's a big penalty, but they just don't have any choice. They have to follow the practice statement. Now, how do you get a lower penalty from the practice statement? It's very hard. You have to have a very good compliance history, but the fact that you handed in your SG form late already hurts you there. You have to have some really good reason for not handing in the form on time, but what could you say? You can't say I didn't know about it. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. You can't say I forgot. That's no excuse. You really need to be like in a coma or something, right? And even if you were in a coma, they'd say, well, why didn't you get someone else in your office to do it? So it's really hard to get out of. Now, that's why you can end up with a really large bill, and you might be looking at this bill thinking, hey, this is more than the super that I even owe, or I've already paid this. The bill is actually correct according to the law, but it doesn't end there, because there are things you can do about it. There are two things commonly that we look at in this situation, and that usually helps. The first is, just like the form and the rules have their own technicalities, like, you pay interest to the day you hand in the form and this and that, there are other technicalities in the calculation, so that if you fill in the form correctly, will significantly reduce the SG charge and the interest, which would then significantly reduce the penalties, because the penalties are calculated based on the SG charge. So the first thing is to just throw every trick in the book at it, which is going to be based on your specific circumstances, to try to get the amount that the form spits out as you owing as low as possible. The second thing that you could do after you've done the first process, and I strongly recommend you do the first process, is to appeal to the tribunal. Now, if you go through the ATO's internal mechanisms, there's not a lot you can do, and there's not a lot the tax office can do, because they have to follow this practice statement. And it's just binding on everyone who works there. But the tribunal doesn't necessarily have to follow the practice statement. They don't necessarily have to follow it. Now, whether they choose to follow it anyway or not, it's up to the tribunal member. But the fact is that at least there's a chance that they can take into account different factors and use those factors to work out a more reasonable penalty. Whereas the person in the tax office just doesn't even have the opportunity to do that, because they're bound by the practice statement. So those are sort of the two things that you can do. So to summarize, number one, make sure you use every trick in the book when you're filling in the form. Get the bill down as low as possible. And number two, if there's something left over, it's worth appealing to the tribunal, having a go, and trying to get that down. So good luck. Hopefully it works out. But know that, there are always options, and hopefully you can get through this.